So here's the thing about productivity, right? When you explore a new tool, you're first going to try out the features that make it stand out. And in the case of Marimo, that might be the fact that you can combine user interface elements with Python code. So over here, you can see that I can change the slider around. And whenever I do that, you can see that the cell down below over here updates. So hey, I'm able to combine user interface elements with Python in a native way. That allows me to rethink the way that I work. That's great. That's a boost of productivity. But here's the risk. You might look at this and go, oh, I'm just going to use the UI elements in Marimo, and that'll be my path to productivity. And by thinking that, you are going to forego all the other amazing features that are in Marimo. And that's going to be the topic of this video. In this video, I'm going to give you my list of favorite Marimo features that typically go unnoticed in the hope that they can make you more productive. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning. I'm just going to type marimo edit and then start.py. Note, by the way, that start.py is the name of the file that I'm going to store everything in. Python files are great just because Git is so much nicer, but they also give us this one extra benefit. And let me just open this one first. The first cell is importing Marimo, and in the second cell, I'm just going to type hello world. Nothing special, just hello world. And here's the cool thing, if I now type Python and then start.py, you'll notice that I'm able to print hello world. And for reusability, this is already a huge win, because anything I do in the notebook can immediately be something I run from the terminal. So if we're going to be running notebooks from the command line as well, we can make them even more useful by just adding this sandbox flag when we make an edit. It'll become clear what it does in a minute, but let's first add some features to this notebook. So let's do away with that hello world, and instead I am going to, from typer, import typer. This is a tool that makes it easy for me to write command line apps. Notice, by the way, that Marimo is automatically detecting that a dependency needs to be installed, so I'm going to hit yes, go ahead and install. And I made an app that's relatively simple. One command is called hello, the other command is goodbye, but I would like to run this from the command line. And I'm going to be using a Marimo feature here. I can call mo.appmeta, and then mode, and then it's going to be able to tell me what mode the notebook is running in. And I could say, look, if I am running this as a script, then we're going to run the typer app using this app call over here. And again, the app that I've got down below over here is defined over here. When I now go back to my terminal, I can see that some things happened. So let's quit the notebook now. And just for good measure, let's have a look at what's in it now. So if I just have a look at the contents, then you'll notice, and this is because of that sandbox flag, that we now have this bit at the top over here that contains the dependencies. We can see that we need a specific Python version, but you can also see that we need typer of a specific version as well. And this is a feature from UV. Because Marimo notebooks aren't just Python files, we can add these script dependencies on top, which means that I could now say, hey, UV run start.py, and then UV will automatically detect that there are dependencies needed. And it's going to start using the typer app. I can do -- help here to get a list of the commands that are available. One of the commands is hello. I can get the help text for that as well. And I should be able to do something like hello and then type Vincent, and I should say hello Vincent. So there you go. If you want to have a notebook where you've got some charts to help you debug, but you still want the output to be a command line app, because Marimo is just a Python file under the hood, and because we can add sandbox information, it all just works. So this is a really neat way to write command line apps. The sandbox flag is great because it allows us to attach dependencies on a single Python file. It makes it just so much more reproducible because everything is nice and self-contained. But there is another flag that also deserves some attention, and that is the watch flag. So let me add watch now, and let's start the notebook one more time. So I use the watch flag. This is the terminal that started the notebook, and you can see on the right-hand side over here that I've also got the notebook itself. But let's now do something fun. What I can do is I can open up a new tab, and I'm just going to open up that notebook in NeoVim. And from here, I am able to make some edits. So what I'm just going to go ahead and do now is I'm just going to insert a print statement over here. Hello from NVim. And I'm going to write and then quit, and pay attention to what happens in the browser now if I quit while writing. That's right, the notebook updated automatically. I didn't have to refresh anything. We were able to make a change to this cell over here, and the cell also automatically ran as a result. So that phenomenon that we have where cells can automatically update, that doesn't just happen whenever you're working from inside of a notebook. You can also make sure that changes from outside can also cause that behavior. And that is super interesting if you like to use vibe coding apps like Claude. So one thing I could do is I could say, can you see the start.py file, add a markdown cell that explains what the typer app does. Hit enter. Claude is telling me that it's going to make some changes. I can inspect what it wants to do, and it wants to make a markdown cell. This looks good. I'm just going to hit yes. And boom, this markdown cell just got added. And I can choose to hide it, but this is really nice. This watch flag is useful in general, but it's also very useful specifically if you're interested to use vibe coding tools like Claude to make edits to your Marimo notebooks. If that sounds interesting, check the link in the show notes. We've created a Claude.md file that's specific to Marimo notebooks to make sure you get the best experience. Now, if you're feeling adventurous, there's also this extra feature that you might want to try, and that is the marimo new command. Instead of using marimo edit, where you're going to start with an empty file and then you're going to fill it, you can also try to use an LLM to generate one from scratch for you. And that's what the new command does. It's effectively going to generate a prompt for you that's going to send to a cloud backend to generate the notebook. So as a description, I could say, hey, I want to have a mortgage calculator. Again, this is going to generate a prompt that's eventually going to end up at either OpenAI or Anthropic, which is also why when I hit enter now, you do get this small warning that tells you what is going to be happening when we actually run this command. But if you accept these terms, we can experiment and see what the notebook is going to be like. And here's what it came up with. We have a notebook with a bunch of UI elements. So that all looks pretty interesting. Let me just go into app mode right now. And that should let me play around with a couple of these sliders and we can see a chart update. And yeah, this does look like a mortgage calculation. We pay less and less interest. More and more of the principal amount is going to be paid. We can, change a whole lot, but there you go. You can zero shot a notebook as well, if that is something you're interested in. Your mileage, of course, might vary, but it can be a fun way to try out something new and real quick. Given that we've got a somewhat elaborate notebook at this point, one thing I could now also do is show you the markdown features, because what I can do is I can go to the menu on top, hit download, and then go to download as markdown. I downloaded it and called the file mortgage.md, and this is what it looks like. You can see there's a little bit of front matter on top, and then all the different cells are basically Python blocks with this one .marimo annotation at the end. So you can see this is the full notebook, but here comes the interesting bit. We can also just run a Marimo notebook from this file as well. If I were now to run marimo edit, and let's also add the sandbox flag for good measure, I can point to that mortgage.md file. When the notebook starts, I can see that, yeah, this is the mortgage.md file. I can also see that it wants to install some dependencies, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes to that. And with these dependencies installed, I'm just going to hit save for good measure. But now if I go back to the terminal, and if I were to look at that MD file again, then you can see that we added some more front matter. So we've got our dependencies over here. This is great for a couple of reasons. Sometimes a markdown file is just more convenient, especially if you're interested in maybe turning this into a blog post or something like that. But second, LLMs also like markdown files, so you can also just run this file with a watch flag attached, and depending on what you're trying to do, it might be easier for the LLM to make changes. The next tip is all about organization. If you want to be productive, it helps to have an organized notebook. And I've got an example here. It's a notebook as you would sort of expect. There's a bunch of code on top. There's a little bit of these markdown cells. Then we have some plots. And, the notebook is sort of okay, but we can show a few things that help you organize it properly. The first thing that I did is I added these markdown cells. And if you add a markdown cell that has a header, then you are also able to hide the code that's underneath. And that's a huge improvement because this will save you a lot of scrolling. And that's already a good win for organization. You can, however, also go a step further. If you hit the cog on top over here, then you can set the display width. Right now it's set to compact, but you can also set it to medium. This makes it wider. You can also go for full, which really makes a difference if you're on a big screen. But the coolest feature here is to go for columns instead. This will allow you to add a second dimension to your notebook. You can add the plus icon here to add a column on the side. Let's add a few. And then what you're able to do is you're able to click and drag a whole section. And again, the reason why I'm able to do that is because I added a header, so that makes it easy for me to click and drag whole chunks around. And I can also make this just a little bit more thin. I'm able to just grab this one, move it to the side over here. And lo and behold, if I now zoom out, I can unfold. The first column over here is all about setting up all the requirements, and then this part over here has some plots, and you can imagine that this is useful in a bunch of scenarios. You always have to do a little bit of boilerplate, set things up, then there's a higher level of abstraction, and then maybe there's some charts with some UI elements maybe. And after trying out columns, it really does feel that if you use just a single column, that you're really just thinking in one dimension. Adding a second column on the side really does give you that extra oomph when it comes to organization, which I like to think also makes you more productive. Now, on the topic of productivity, I do want to mention that what I just did is kind of suboptimal. I use my mouse to go to this cog over here, then I can hit display, and I can also go to the user settings down over here, and again, I can use my mouse to click around, but clicking and dragging and moving the mouse That's not amazing. I really like to have my hands on the keyboard instead. That's always going to be faster than using the mouse, and not to mention, it's probably also way more ergonomic. So what you can also do is use the command palette. You can hit Command and then K to bring up a command palette, and from here you can just change some settings by typing. So what I could do is I could maybe set the width to medium. So if I type medium, you can see that I can go to app config, set the width. I can do that from here. There's also toggling the theme. So I could go to maybe dark mode. That's also something I can just quickly toggle from here. Let's go back to light mode. And there's all sorts of things that you can quickly configure from here. Another thing that's also quite popular is if you're interested in knowing more about the keyboard shortcuts, you can just type keyboard and then you can see keyboard shortcuts. One thing to quickly note, by the way, is that some of these commands also just have a keyboard shortcut attached. You can also learn those if you're interested. And if you want to change any of these shortcuts, by the way, that's also something you can totally do. All the shortcuts that are listed here are things that you could change yourself as well. Okay, so we're making progress now. We have columns, so our code feels organized, but there will be a time when we also have to do a little bit of debugging. And it could be that this class is the origin of the bug, and you would want to know where it's defined. This brings me to my favorite debugging technique, and that is to use the minimap. To turn it on, you can take your mouse and move it all the way down here to hit this minimap down below, but even better, we can also use the command palette again, Command K, and then type minimap, and then we see the toggle minimap option that we can go for. Note there's also a keyboard shortcut, Shift Command I if you're so interested. Now what's really cool about this minimap is that it gives me an overview of things that are in the cell that are defined elsewhere. So for example, I can see what's being defined here, but I can also see that the simple feed forward class that I had, that's the one over here, hey, that is also in this minimap. And when I click it, you can see that the screen actually moves to the cell where it's being defined. So if you ever are in trouble, you're trying to debug, but you can't really find the code quite easily, sure, you can do Command F and all those things that you're used to in the browser, but the minimap typically is just the easier route to go for, and it's a great feature when you're trying to debug. Again, productivity, that thing is amazing. Now for my next big feature, if you were to ask me what I do day to day in a notebook, I would say 9 times out of 10, you're doing something with a data frame or a table. And that's where the data frame widget really deserves to be in the spotlight. I have a data frame open over here that's all about recipes. So there's some sort of an ID for a recipe, there's a name. We also have a description over here. I can scroll to the right, there's a link. There's also some named entities that are being detected, a list of ingredients, as well as some steps. So, okay, we have a data frame. It has about 6,000 rows, 7 columns. Now, if you're coming from Jupyter, you're probably used to seeing a static output whenever you talk to a data frame. But this is fully interactive. So just to give an example, I have pagination at the bottom here, so I can scroll through more than one set of data without having to write any code. There's also a download button over here, by the way. If you expose this data frame widget in some sort of web app that you're building with Marimo, you can also choose to copy it to your clipboard, so users can copy this in their Excel file. You can also export it to Parquet, CSV, or JSON. All that stuff's great too. You can also select a column and choose to maybe sort it, ascending, descending. You can also choose to maybe apply some formatting. And you can also filter by column here by just doing a filter directly. For numeric columns, you can also do greater than and that sort of thing. But I think the most underappreciated of all of these features is at the bottom here. There's these 4 icons that you can click. This first one allows you to just directly search. So let's say I'm looking for pork. You just type pork, and whenever there's a row that has a string pork in it, it's going to show. And this is just great for quick searching around. Maybe Italian. Amazing. Let's turn off search and let's instead go for this chart builder. This is also a great feature. You can have your table over here, but then you can also hit this plus icon to just click together some charts, very much in a low code kind of way. The thinking here is that you expose this data frame maybe to like a business user in an app, and from there, they don't need to write any code to build charts. There's also a row viewer, which is particularly useful for this data set. So here it is, this is a single row. And notice how, especially if you've got a data frame with long text in it, having a row viewer actually just allows you to explore one row at a time, and you can really go a bit deeper. And again, this is one row at a time. So if I were to scroll around here, you can actually see some interaction as well. As I paginate, you are going to see the row that is currently being selected in the data frame widget. But besides checking out the rows, you can also explore the columns. And this is where you can get some great summaries. To demonstrate the column feature, I'm switching to a different data set, one that has numeric values as well as categoricals. And what I can do from here is expand and then also see a chart. In this case, in order to see the chart, I have to install Vega Fusion, and there's a button that I can click to go ahead and do that. And when I do, I can get a quick summary of that one column. There's some numbers at the bottom here, but there's also a nice summary chart. And for this particular data set, it feels like there's some dirty data over here. This is a data set about World of Warcraft. These are different classes. If we're dealing with a numeric value, then we can also see a proper distribution chart. I see some min-max values, quantiles. This is all super useful. You can do your exploratory data analysis with these data frame widgets because they do come with batteries included. And this saves you a whole lot of code writing and also cells that you're going to throw away afterwards anyway. So make use of this widget as much as possible. And of course, one thing to also add on top of that, Marimo of course supports SQL using DuckDB. So one thing you could do is you could do select star from, and in this case, you can point to a data frame. And also when you run SQL, you get the same widget out. It's just that the backend now is maybe DuckDB instead of Polars. And also, just as an aside, you can also hook up data sources. So if you hit this Explore Data Sources tab, you can hit this plus icon over here and you can see all sorts of different databases that we support, as well as data backends like BigQuery and Apache Iceberg. So you can also pull your data from lots of different sources and see them in here. And that's not even the coolest feature when it comes to data frames. When you scroll to the bottom, you can see that there is this Generate with AI button that you can go ahead and click. And what you can do here is you can do @ and then point to any variable that's currently in scope. And in particular, if you are pointing to a data frame, then we can do something extra with the prompt. A data frame has a schema of sorts. We have column names, we also know the type depending on the data frame, right? And we also can send maybe the first couple of rows to the LLM, and that gives us a lot of context about the data frame that is currently in memory. This is super useful, especially if you're dealing with Parquet files in a long chain of Polar's pipeline steps, partially because Parquet files are hard to read for an LLM. Unlike a CSV file, you can't just look at the first 5 rows using a bash command. But most of all, if you're working with an LLM and you're making a couple of changes, the state of the data frame becomes very hard to guess after a few steps. So having access to the actual data frame in memory right now is going to help the LLM a whole lot when it tries to do code generation for it. So in this case, I'm pointing to the World of Warcraft data frame, and I can ask how many races are there in this World of Warcraft data set, ? And you can see that it's able to generate the code for me. It's able to detect the right column, even though I didn't directly mention that to it. And of course, this feature works in multiple places. You can go to the sidebar over here and hit this Chat with AI button. Also here, you can do @ and then point to a data frame. And as an alternative, what you can also do is you can hit Shift-Command-E in any existing cell, and then also you can refer to a data frame variable or a data source if you would. Any data frame that you store as a variable will be added as a data source, as well as any tables that are detected by whatever engine that you added. And I gotta say, if you're dealing with data, having access to a variable in memory and being able to pass that along to the LLM is a huge time saver, and it can definitely save you a lot of time as you're using an LLM to help write your analysis. So Marimo gives you a lot of widgets. We saw the data frame, but there's also the slider that we mentioned before. And if you're interested to explore more widgets, what you can do is you can explore this mo.ui library. There's lots of widgets in here. All those widgets are great, but sometimes you might want to write your own. And for that, we have a project that we can reuse. The name of the project is called AnyWidget. It's a great project. It is a way for you to define widgets that are reusable across the ecosystem of different notebooks. If you build an AnyWidget, it'll work in Marimo, but it will also work in Jupyter, as well as the VS Code notebook, and a whole plethora of other places. And just as a quick first demo, I'm just going to copy the example that's shown on the front page. I'm going to pull that into Marimo. I'm just going to place it right there. This is a counter widget. The way it works is you attach some ESM. This is the JavaScript that's needed to run this widget. And then you also define the traits that are also available in Python. And the whole point of AnyWidget is to make it easy to synchronize the state between the Python side of things and the JavaScript side of things. In this case, we're directly adding a string over here. You can also point to a file if you want to maybe make a proper package. But what I just quickly want to show at this point is we have an AnyWidget defined. And to use it, it tends to be a good idea to wrap that with moi.anywidget. This guarantees that the syncing happens the way the Marimo would expect it to. So let's call that widget equals, and then I can show you what the variable looks like. The variable is a button, and every time I click, you can see that a count goes up. And if I were to take that widget and ask for the value, then you can also see that every time that I hit this button, that then the cell down below updates as a result. And this is a simple example of a button that I click to see a number go up, but you can, of course, do more elaborate things. And I suppose my favorite example is this library that I wrote called draw data. So from draw data, I'm just going to import this scatter widget. And again, let's wrap that with moi anywidget. And let's also call this draw widget. Let's also zoom out a little bit here. So what I've done now is I've added a widget on top over here that allows me to draw some data. And then I'm referring to a property on that widget, and just look what happens when I actually start drawing. I'm just going to draw some blue dots over here. Maybe let's also draw some orange ones. Let's make the slider a bit more thin. Let's maybe also draw some green ones, and let's have that be like very wide, lots of scatters, right? And you can see that every time that I draw, the data frame below updates. And this is just an example of a very useful widget. But these are things that work quite natively inside of Marimo. There's also a small community of people making more and more expressive widgets for bespoke use cases. If you're curious, you can also check the show notes and see how I took this gamepad and also made this available as a controller inside of Marimo using this AnyWidget ecosystem. So even if the widget doesn't exist inside of Marimo, you can still maybe find it elsewhere, or you can build your own. Because I gotta say, LLMs are also pretty good at vibe coding these widgets at this point in time as well. So that's also something definitely to explore, because having the right widget makes you more productive in the notebook as well. There's a few more productivity demos to go, but in this case, I want to start with a bit of a whiteboarding exercise to explain what we're going to do. The first thing that I'll do in a bit is I'm going to start a Marimo notebook. That's this file over here. However, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to make a Python file that's separate. In that Python notebook, I'm going to write some utility code, and this Marimo notebook is going to use it. And as we'll see, we can set everything up in such a way such that if I update this Python file, that then the Marimo notebook can also automatically update, which is also a huge productivity feature. This means that if you do enjoy working from an IDE, you can definitely do so, and you can write your utility functions and still use them from Marimo in a very interactive way. So Marimo edit sandbox import-demo.py, that's my Marimo notebook. And I'm also going to start a utils.py file over here. And let's just have a very basic file here, number equals 20. And just for good measure, I have a notebook on the left side, the Python file on the right. And what I can do now is I can go to the bottom over here, and I can make sure that the on module change is set to auto run. And if I were now to say, hey, from utils import number, and then I can actually show you the number, right? If I were now to go back into NeoVim and maybe change the number, let's make it 120, right? That's right. Then you can see the notebook update automatically. So that means that if you want, you can actually trigger changes from a different file. So just as another demo, let's have a new number appear as well, right? So new number is equal to the old number times 3. If I were now to change the number one more time, add a 1 there, then you can see that because the imports changed, all the cells that depend on it also changed. So this also gives you that extra level of flexibility if you want to trigger your notebook to run based on changes that you're making in separate Python files. But we can also take this one final step further, because you're not just able to do this with a normal Python file, you can also do this with a Marimo notebook. What you can do is you can define functions in a Marimo notebook that then another Marimo notebook uses. And just to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start one more notebook. Again, let's do this in sandbox mode, and let's call this utility-belt.py. So there we are. I've got two notebooks now. And what I'm going to do is on this right-hand notebook, I'm going to write a simulation function. So just simulate that how to do it, maybe number of rows, something like that. And then I'm going to return something that NumPy generated, random, normal. And if I put n in there, let's see what happens when I call simulate. N is equal to 100. Oh, it says that NumPy is not defined, so that has to be around, obviously, right? And that error makes sense, but I also want NumPy to be around when I import it. So in this particular case, it does help to add this thing called a setup cell. You can hit Command K, type setup, and there's this add setup cell that you can trigger. Then on top, this is the setup cell. And this cell is special because this is the one cell that is importing everything that we might need. And this is the one thing that's going to run before anything else does. So in this case, I can import NumPy as NP over here. It's going to install NumPy. That seems fine. I can see that my simulate function now works. And let's also maybe change it, because right now it's just taking that first argument as the mean. That's not what I want. I think I got to do 0, 1 for normal variables. Yeah, okay, there we go. That looks good. And now what I can do is I can move back to this file. Let's throw away these cells. And then in this first cell over here, I'm going to say from utility belt, util belt, import, simulate. And in this case, this notebook detects that it needs NumPy 2 in order to run the simulate function. So yeah, let's install that. Let's run this one more time. I'm going to run simulate, and let's say 10 numbers. There we go. That looks good. If I were to maybe make a change over here, then we also see that the notebook on the side updates. So let's say that we're going to generate twice as many numbers as n, right? Just for good measure, this automatically updates. So there you go. You can also choose to have Marimo notebooks update other Marimo notebooks based on the functions that they contain. And that also means that theoretically, if you wanted to, it's perfectly fine to have a utility Marimo notebook around where you still have charts to help you debug the function, and then have another Marimo notebook actually use them. And all these Marimo notebooks can have their dependencies inlined. Everything will still be nice and self-contained. But there you go. These are lots of features that I think go underappreciated. But there you go. This was my list of underappreciated features that I do think will make you way more productive if you start using them. It could be, though, that I've missed a feature that you really like to use, and if that's the case, feel free to leave a comment down below. I also added a couple of links to reference materials and documentation, and if you're keen to do another fun deep dive on another amazing feature, make sure you click this video for more info. Thanks for listening.